Jay Scherr.
Jay Scherr.
Jay Scherr.
Jay Scherr,
business consultant.
Jay Scherr.
Jay Scherr Business Consulting.
Hey everybody, I'm Jay Scherr with Jay Scherr Business Consulting. We help entrepreneurs, business owners, and leaders maximize their potential, build rock-solid businesses, and create more freedom in their lives. And you've joined Business Minds Coffee Chat. Winston Churchill said, "Study history, study history. In history lies all the secrets of statecraft." Well, on today's episode, we talk about applying the lessons of history in decision-making, timeless leadership, transformational storytelling, avoiding shiny object syndrome, and more. My guest is a husband and father of three, a leadership advisor, communications strategist, keynote speaker, storyteller, and podcast host of 3 different podcasts. He's a former Fortune 10 executive who for 6 years was the first global head of social media and digital communications at Ford Motor Company. His list of clients includes Ford, IBM, Walmart, Google, and Reebok, among many others. He's been featured by NBC, NPR, CNN, Harvard Business Review, The Wall Street Journal, and many other mainstream media outlets. Alan Mulally, the former president and CEO of Ford, called him a visionary, and The Economist ranked him #1 on their list of 25 social business leaders. Please welcome the man who's teaching us how to become better communicators, better leaders, and better humans, Scott Monty. Scott, it is great to see you. Thank you so much for being here today.
Hi, Jay. It's an honor to be with you.
Well, I am very excited about our conversation today. So let's dive right in. I thought a good starting point for us would be for you to share with our audience what your favorite trait is about yourself.
Goodness. First of all, this is really hard for me to do because I am a terrible self-promoter. So I have to say it's my humility. But that sounds a little off, isn't it? Humility cuts both ways, doesn't it? I think as we look to leaders who inspire us, we aren't looking most of the time for chest thumpers. We're looking for people who are capable, who are considerate, and who inspire other people. And interestingly enough, I think it was episode 4 or 5 of the Timeless Leadership podcast, shortly after I launched it a couple of years ago. I interviewed a leader and an author by the name of Marilyn Gist. And Marilyn wrote a book called The Extraordinary Power of Leadership Humility. And I went into it assuming that humility was as we typically think of it, someone who is self-deprecating, is not the center of attention. And while that is true, the leadership humility that she defined was about recognizing the dignity in others. And to me, that spoke volumes, because when you think about servant leaders, when you think about leaders who are truly humble and who exercise humility, they do make other people feel good about themselves. They recognize and respect the contributions of other members of the team, and they don't make it all about themselves. So I hope to aspire to that level of leadership humility, but it's tough to talk about as a favorite trait.
Well, let's stay on that point for a moment. I would love it if you would give us an example of where you have exercised humility or used that as a personality trait more recently, something that shows where you recognize the dignity in others.
Well, I think, and I learned this the hard way when I was an executive at Ford. I was brought in as kind of a superstar in the social media and digital communications area. And this would have been back in 2008, back when social media was just getting a foothold in the mainstream. And unfortunately, I look back to some of the things that I did as a leader then, and I wince now, knowing what I do and being more self-aware. And as I think about the work that I do now, the stories I tell, the clients I help, fundamentally, it's about taking great instances of success, of failure, of stories, and highlighting those for other people, right? So it's not me knowing everything. It's not me being the center of attention. It's asking questions. It's being curious. And it's highlighting things to help other people get to the next level. And I think that's what any good leader does, is they clear the field and make it easy for, or easier for, their people to succeed. You remove obstacles, you remove detriments, you increase your communication, your effective communication, that is, and hopefully that makes it easier for the people that you're leading to succeed in their own areas of interest.
Yeah, that's a great point and a great way of saying it. You use the word wince when you think about looking back over some maybe engagements or exchanges that you had in the past. And as you were saying that, it immediately brought to mind some of those wince moments for me as well. And, you hit on the awareness component. I can say with full transparency that at that stage back in years of my corporate life, I just did not have that sense of awareness that, as much as I have now, and I still have a long way to go, but I'm a work in progress. But those moments that teach us these amazing lessons, and we're going to talk about history here, but it really does give us a good look at areas that we can improve upon, areas where we possibly have fallen short. And then what we do with that information once we have that awareness, that is mission critical. That's where we can actually do something about it.
That's right. And to me, I mean, the awareness, the wisdom, the knowledge that we gain from reflection. And I want to pause here for a moment, because I think we don't spend enough time in reflection. And I don't think we spend enough time talking about reflection. When you consider the pace of the world, we're barraged by so much information coming at us every day. When you look at the pace that people swipe through TikTok videos on their phones, or Instagram reels, or, whatever it may be, we spend so much time distracting ourselves every day that we're almost running from our own thoughts. We're running from opportunities of self-awareness. And the good leaders, or the better leaders, I should say, are the ones who carve out time for reflection, who understand the power of unplugging. I mean, we hear about so many people now appreciating the importance of a digital detox, right? Where they leave their devices behind for a weekend, an afternoon, maybe a whole vacation. And I think it's incredibly ironic that we have to unplug to recharge, but here we are. This is a time for us to become more reflective in what it is that we're looking to accomplish. And when we can reflect on what our priorities are, what our purpose is, what other people mean to us, that in turn leads to gratitude. And when we communicate that gratitude to the people that are important in our lives, whether they're work colleagues or family members or friends, this helps deepen that relationship. And a deepened relationship means more trust.
So powerful. So let's stay on reflection for a moment. Do you have a reflection practice that you utilize on a daily basis? Walk us through what that would look like for you, and then also for the leaders that you work with today. How do you incorporate reflection into their daily lives?
Yeah, well, everybody's going to have a different approach. I mean, some people meditate. Some people just like to work out and go on long runs and use that as an opportunity to connect with themselves. I'm a huge fan of the Latin phrase what is it? Solvitur ambulando. Solvitur ambulando, and it means it is solved by walking. And you think about, I mean, some of the greats in history, Beethoven, Thomas Carlyle, they write of walks in nature. And these walks in nature have allowed them not only to connect with the world around them, instead of having our head down in a phone, for example, but it also gives us an opportunity to connect with ourselves. It's not too different from when all these, I'm sure you've noticed this, Jay, when you get great thoughts in the shower. Why? Because your attention is focused. You're not distracted by so many of these other things. Right. So for some people, it might be a walk. For others, it might be a shower. Others might do meditation. For me, a few years ago, I stopped checking my phone first thing in the morning when I woke up. And in the 2000s, it's almost like the culture in the 1940s and 50s. If you've seen in any old movies, black and white movies or television shows, a lot of times the first thing the character did when they woke from bed was reach for what? A pack of cigarettes, right? It was a stimulant designed to get them going in the morning. And we use our phones very similarly. So for me, I don't engage with the phone first thing in the morning. I make my coffee, and how appropriate that we're talking about this here on the business coffee chat. And then I usually grab a book. If any of your listeners are not watching the video version of this podcast, you won't see this, but the video viewers will. I'm surrounded by books. I love reading, and it doesn't matter to me whether it's something that came out last week or something that came out millennia ago. There's wisdom and knowledge to be gleaned everywhere we go. And to me, having some time every day to myself, to pick up a book, a magazine, etc., and just enjoy it. Let it wash over my mind. And it's very refreshing to me to be able to either start the day or wind down at some point in the day with some piece of reading.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. Like you, I avoid electronics in general first thing in the morning. So part of my morning routine, and this is, let's say, within the past 4 to 5 years, because prior to that, I was reaching for the phone first thing or some sort of digital device. But I drink water, then I'll read, and I'll read a passage or two from a book, and then it is a gratitude practice where I'm actually journaling. Then I'm actually going to the gym. So my morning routine is approximately 2 hours before I start the day and dig into the priorities of that moment and check emails and so forth. And it has made a significant difference. And I think, to your point about reading, just engaging our mind differently, reading good material. And I'm sure your bookshelves are stocked with amazing books like mine are over here. But I find it very, very stimulating. Like, as an example, so the one book that I read from daily is a book on stoicism. And it helps to ground me, but it also engages different parts of my mind. It challenges my thinking. It challenges my existing beliefs.
Yeah.
And I need that. It's helps to cultivate new ideas, and it just helps me show up differently to the world each day. So
absolutely.
So I appreciate you.
I'm glad you mentioned Stoicism too, because as a classics major, as an undergrad, I've come to appreciate my education more some X decades, shall we say, later than I did at the time. I was just doing classics by way of biding my time until I could get to medical school. Um, Obviously, I'm not a doctor now, so life took a different path. But for me, it was really about expanding my knowledge. And I think back now to the coursework and the essays and everything I did then. And I didn't realize it then, but it prepared me for what I'm doing now. And I think we've seen a rebound of interest in Stoics and Stoicism in recent years. And to me, that's a good sign because one, it means people are taking the time to reflect on things, which is what a lot of Stoicism is. It's incredibly timely because we live in such a complex and uncertain world. A big part of Stoicism is letting go of all those things that you can't control. And as a leader, whether you're leading a family or leading a team or an entire organization, there are only so many things you can control. And understanding what to engage with and what not to, a lot of that can come straight from that Stoic philosophy as well.
Absolutely. Do you also meditate? Formal meditation practice?
I am not a habitual meditator. I do it occasionally, but to me, it's really through other activities, through reading, through walking, etc., and getting away from the death scrolling on my phone.
Absolutely. So I'm curious, what is something that you believed about yourself early on in your career or early on in life that you found out later wasn't true?
Hmm. Well, Jay, it's interesting because I mentioned just now that I had intended to go to medical school,
Mhm.
and I thought I had all the hallmarks of what would make a good physician. And interestingly enough, while I was an undergrad, I was president of the Pre-Med Society at Boston University. And during that time, we had an opportunity to bring in a lot of really talented and successful physicians from the Boston area to speak to our membership. And I took it upon myself during that time to loosely survey every single one of them. And this would have been back in the early 1990s. And if people weren't around back then or actually aware of what was going on back then, it was a very contentious time in healthcare. Well, when isn't it? But back then, it was the advent of managed care. HMOs were just catching on. This was just before the purported healthcare plan that the Clinton administration wanted to put in place, et cetera. There's a lot of upheaval, a lot of uncertainty. And when I surveyed these doctors loosely, I found that they had a 50% job satisfaction rate. And I thought, my God, if half of them are dissatisfied with this profession that they have spent so much time and so many resources on, maybe I should give this a second thought before I jump into it. And so what I did was I did kind of a provisional first year of medical school in pursuit of a master's in medical science. And if I liked where I was going and how things worked out, I could then go for the next 3 years and get the MD. Well, it turns out I did not like medical school. I really had a hard time with the science aspect of it. And let's face it, when you go to a doctor, you want them to kind of have the science part down. What I did enjoy was the human element of it, getting to know the patient, taking histories, understanding behaviors, and making observances about human nature. And I quickly realized that, well, that's an important part of medicine. However, you can also take those skill sets and apply them to lots of different areas in life, right? So for me, it was a wake-up call that I was, in fact, not meant to be a physician, but that I still had some skill sets that I could take and explore in other directions.
So to continue down that particular path at this point, so you decide to not pursue medical school and you went into business. Is that correct?
I did. Yeah, I continued on with a master's in medical science, and then I added an MBA in healthcare administration to it. So it's kind of a double threat there. I had just enough knowledge in either field to be dangerous.
Interesting. So talk about the evolution from that point to going to work for Ford Motor Company.
So interestingly, Jay, my career, as I look back on it, has had a lot of twists and turns. And the lesson that I take from all of this is to be prepared for whatever's coming next. There's no way to predict exactly the way the world is going or the way even your own career unfolds. So to be prepared and to be curious is absolutely essential. So I went on to work for a healthcare company. We provided networks of doctors and hospitals that medium-sized insurance companies and large employers needed to apply their healthcare plans to. So we've got an insurance plan, we've got a healthcare plan. Now we need to send you to the network of doctors that will see you, essentially. So I was on the sales and marketing team there. And within 3 years, I noticed I was getting a flat mark on my forehead from banging my head against the wall so many times, and realized that managed care was not about to change for me. And I was not in any position to be able to change the industry. So I happened to run into someone at a social function, and we just got chatting. I said I worked in healthcare. He said, "Oh, I run a healthcare consulting firm." And in the next couple of months, I wound up working for him. In that capacity, I was working in a corporate development role. We had clients that had early stage technology, medical devices and biotech drugs and whatnot. They were looking for financial and scientific partners to further them to the market. And that worked out well until September 11th came along, and the deal-making market just evaporated almost overnight. And this was a small family business, so we actually had to shut that portion of the business down. From there, I ended up going to an advertising and marketing firm, kind of taking that knowledge that I had of these medical device and biotech companies and then applying it back to marketing and advertising. And they also had a healthcare practice. So they were kind of on the tech and healthcare side. And while I was there, I suddenly got the bug for social media. We began to see the rise of blogs, and YouTube became a thing. And all of a sudden there was this thing called podcasting. And I had a client there who was looking for a way to stand out with thought leadership that didn't involve the usual landing page and white papers that we see in the B2B market. And I said to her, there's this new technology called podcasting. If we could create a show for you, and you could host the show, your company could host the show, bring on smart people and interview them. And simply by virtue of surrounding yourselves with all these smart people, you benefit from the thought leadership. And there's an opportunity to kind of plug your company in there without being too overly salesy. And I'll never forget the conversation. She said, "Scott, can you show me a case study about this?" Well, podcasting had launched maybe 3 months before, so we were very early on. And I said, I told her just that. And I said, "Look, do you want to read a case study or do you want to be a case study?" And she said, "I want to read a case study." Well, you can't really do anything with that. So I felt that flat spot on my head coming back again. And I ended up leaving to go to a boutique consulting firm that just did social media strategy. And I was there for about a year, and I got a call from Ford Motor Company. "We're creating this new position. It's an executive level position. Won't you consider it?" And long story short, they sold me on it. I heard about Alan Mulally and his amazing leadership prowess at the company. I heard about his plan that he had for the company. And most of all, when I visited there, there was a palpable sense of optimism and um, just a morale boost that you could feel walking in the doors. And you wouldn't expect that in 2008 from a US automaker. And yet here it was. And I thought there is something very special going on here that has to do with more than just numbers and plans. So I signed up, and lo and behold, it was the career move of a lifetime.
So, speaking of that feeling when you walked in those doors and you just had this, there was a sense, an energy, an excitement,
Yeah.
culture. As you began to develop your career there, what were some of the areas that you specifically saw that you were directly involved in that had an impact on the culture of Ford at that time?
Well, what's interesting, Jay, is the culture at Ford was notorious. It of all of the major U.S. auto manufacturers, it probably had the most intractable culture. It was known for silos. As a matter of fact, Henry Ford II, when he designed a new headquarters for the company in downtown Detroit, it is literally a series of silos. And it's now GM's headquarters, spoiler alert. But if you go down to downtown Detroit and you see the GM building, it is literally a center silo and 4 silos right around it. So it physically embodied the culture of the company. It was absolutely ironic. The great news is when I got there 2 years before I had arrived, Bill Ford decided that the company was in such jeopardy that he, the great grandson of the founder of the company, would step down as CEO and chairman and hand the reins over to a non-family member. And this non-family member turned out to be Alan Mulally, who spent 35 years at Boeing as a very successful executive. Now, Alan took the job with the explicit understanding that Bill would remain as executive chairman, right? Because Alan knew that he couldn't do everything and that he needed the reputation and the trust of Bill, and he needed Bill's vision, right? Bill Ford had a vision for the company. Alan had the ability to execute it. So the two of them together just kind of snowplowed the former culture of Ford and brought in a regular process by which transparency was the watchword, and people were completely open about where they were having problems, right? And in previous generations, if you admitted a failure or a problem within the company, you might be decapitated. You'd certainly be ousted. But there was this great fear that everyone lived by. And Alan made sure that everyone knew that, first of all, working together was essential. No single person could get anything done. It's really about working together as a team. And it's trusting each other, being vulnerable, right? Being able to admit mistakes and being able to step up and help out our colleagues. So that culture was already there when I arrived, which quite frankly made my job a heck of a lot easier. I didn't have to go around and clear the way. There was already this groundwork that Alan laid. Now, that doesn't mean I didn't run into log jams here and there. First example I can think of, a few months into my tenure there, I was working closely with the marketing team. I was actually under corporate communications. I was working with the marketing team on getting some project done, and they ran into issues with the legal department. Now, as you can imagine, automakers have vast legal departments, and the legal departments are very conservative. Why? Well, because you're making machinery that could potentially harm people, and there's all sorts of laws and regulations that the auto industry has to abide by. And on the marketing and communication side, it was no different. I had to be very careful about what we said and what we created. And I knew that if my team was going to be successful, that we would have to have the allyship of the general counsel's office. So I went into a meeting with the legal department and I said, look, we need to figure out how to work together best. And quite frankly, you have a reputation around our departments that you put the no in innovation. Well, that actually that caught them a little off guard because they weren't used to humor in meetings. And that disarmed them. And together we actually created a process that worked for both departments, for the legal department and for the communications and marketing department, to ensure that we were working together from the very first moment rather than waiting for a final sign off and, you know, getting shut down.
Amazing. So what were some of the focus areas for you when you first joined the organization? So when we think about social media, we're talking about 2008, 2009 timeframe, early. What were some of those initiatives? What were you prioritizing at that point? I want to give our audience a sense of what the landscape looked like then versus today.
Yeah. Well, we had all sorts of great plans in place, and then reality hit. 10 days after I joined, Ford filed an $8.7 billion quarterly loss, which was the largest in the company's history. And this would have been in July of 2008. And pretty quickly after that, the entire US, actually global auto industry began to melt down concurrently with the financial industry, right? That whole financial upheaval in 08 and 09. And then, of course, the automakers went to Congress to ask for a little help, a little bailout money. Ford was there simply by virtue of supporting the other two U.S. automakers because they were all wrapped up in the same kind of distributor network. And they knew that if any one of them went down, it could actually pull the rest down and pull the entire industry down. So Ford was there for support. 2 years prior, Ford had taken out its own $26 billion home improvement loan, as Alan used to call it. So very quickly, we went into crisis mode. And in crisis mode, it was really about making it clear that Ford had a plan. And, you know, I talked to Alan on the phone just a couple of years ago. We were catching up, and he boiled it down once again. And he was a master of taking a complex problem or a complex concept and simplifying it, but simplifying it in a way that didn't make you feel like you're stupid. Okay. So on this phone call, he said, Scott, it's all about having a plan and communicating the plan. Now, obviously, you need to execute the plan as well, but fundamentally, you need to have a plan in place first, and then you need to talk to people about it. You need to talk to your employees, you need to talk to the public, to your shareholders, your suppliers, et cetera. And that's what we spent 6 months doing nonstop, was reiterating over and over again in every possible medium what the Ford plan was. That brought us into 2009. And in 2009, Ford launched probably one of the most groundbreaking marketing campaigns in its history, called the Fiesta movement. Ford's plan was to start making cars on a global scale. Previously, they had been made regionally. And Alan, with his engineering background, he said, there's no reason that we can't engineer these cars and design these cars the same way all over the world. So the first car that was being ushered in under this was the Fiesta. It had already launched in Europe, but US was quickly catching up. There was about a year lag there. So the marketing campaign was called the Fiesta movement, where Ford would bring over 100 of these European-styled vehicles that would very quickly become US vehicles, and gave these 100 cars to influencers, this is, everything we know about influencers today is vastly different back then. But these people had blogs, they had YouTube channels, they had Flickr channels before there was Instagram. They were on Twitter. They had their own audiences, and they were spread out across the entire United States. They were evenly split, male and female, a vast array of kind of racial and ethnic backgrounds that made it a real melting pot of influencers. And the idea was that they would be the ones telling Ford's story about the Fiesta. And Ford would let them post their content on a Ford website without filters, without any kind of oversight or management, other than for, like profanity, nudity, that kind of stuff. But it was all unfiltered, real-time access to what real people were doing with our vehicles. And that showed Ford's confidence in its plan and its products. It showed a willingness to be transparent and kind of lift the sheet to make it clear that, this is not a slick marketing campaign. It's actually what real people are saying. And fundamentally, knowing, again, human nature, who do people trust? They trust people like themselves. They trust people they've been able to develop a relationship with. So using these audiences of audiences to tell Ford's story. And it was a remarkable, remarkable success that generated more interest in this vehicle than any previous vehicle launch.
Brilliant. Truly brilliant.
It really was.
So let's stay on leadership, because you have pointed out some important characteristics about leadership. And I want to tie this to timeless leadership, because you speak about that quite a bit today. Obviously, it's a name that you use throughout your brand. What did you recognize in Alan and others at Ford with your time there that points to timeless leadership? And I tell you, before you give us an example or what you did see, share with our audience what timeless leadership is.
So essentially, I believe that there are certain virtues, certain principles that we see people practice that are the same today as they've been since the first century. And that's a kind of a tagline from my podcast, that the virtues today in the 21st century are just as applicable as they were in the first century. Again, it's kind of like the Stoics that you and I were talking about earlier. Virtues like honesty and courage and vulnerability and humility. There's probably a good 2 or 3 dozen that I could name. There are certain aspects. Actually, I'm gonna pull up my field notes here as I jot them down. Wisdom, empathy, integrity, patience, resilience, kindness, gratitude. I mean, these are all kinds of virtues that I think we admire in people around us. And we could see them in scout leaders. We could see them in maybe a religious leader, a pastor, or something like that. We could see them in aunts and uncles and family members. We see them certainly in the office as well. Humans of all stripes actually exhibit these virtues on a regular basis. And to me, the thing that I saw at Ford was this marvelous servant leadership that I talked about before, that Alan would put others before himself. He was a master at acknowledging people. My department put out a publication every day called the Clip Sheet. And it published internally on the intranet, and then we sent out a kind of a stapled packet to all the executives. And Alan was one of the recipients. And this was news about the company. It was news about the industry. It was things designed to inform them about what was going on that might potentially affect the company. And whenever there was an article in that clip sheet that mentioned a Ford employee by name, Alan would rip that sheet out of his clip sheet packet, and he would put a big heart around the person's name and write a note on there in his Ford ballpoint pen. And I think I still have a couple of them here. He would have one of these Ford Bic ballpoint pens, and he would draw a heart around there and said, J plus Ford rock, right? And you'd get a note in the interoffice mail from Alan, because he would take the time to acknowledge you as an individual. And I remember getting a call from Alan after, some successful launch or announcement or whatever, and he was calling to congratulate me. And I would in turn congratulate him on the company's performance, his leadership, and whatever. And he said, "Scott, it's an honor to serve." And from a Fortune 10 CEO, here's a guy who's talking about serving others. And to me, that was it was mind-blowing to hear him come down to that level and to celebrate everybody else. So that servant leadership, that humility, that transparency I talked about, Alan had a whole process every Thursday where all of the executives would meet. Each of them had 5 minutes to go through their area of business. And within 3 hours, you had a really good handle on what was going on with the company globally. And you put all of that together, and there was just such a culture shift, a culture momentum there, that it really made it a pleasure and an honor to be part of that organization.
Wow, that's beautiful. And what I love about what you're sharing here is this crosses over not just with large organizations, but any size business can obviously incorporate timeless leadership within their own walls and build a culture that is based on these virtues, that are based on timeless leadership. So I would love it if you would share with our audience, for those who may have a small business today and they're looking to, they don't feel that their culture aligns with some of the things that we're talking about on our call today. What would be a good starting point for a listener today who is looking to change, is looking to upgrade their culture and do things better, do things differently?
Yeah. Well, Jay, I think a lot of it comes down to what we were talking about early on in terms of reflection. You need to be able to take stock of what it is that you stand for. And to me, this is what I go through with a lot of my clients. My role is to simply show up and ask questions. And in asking questions, I actually help people discover what it is within them that's the most important. It's oftentimes we're too close to an issue or a problem to be able to pick it apart ourselves. And having a third party like that to be able to push and pull and help you examine what's inside of you is helpful. So to me, it's really about taking stock and just pulling out a piece of paper and writing down what do you value in your life, personally and professionally. Right. And list those things, and then do a hard assessment as to how your company corresponds to those values. Are you living those values within your company every day? A lot of times people show up differently to work than they do at home. And to me, that's always been difficult to reconcile that. It must be so hard being a different person at work than you are at home. To me, that's what authenticity is about. You are who you are through and through. And with Alan, as I said at Ford, you get him off stage or behind the camera, he was exactly the same as he was in front of the crowd. And that's what made it work so well. So if you're showing up to work, to your business, as an inauthentic representation of yourself, that's going to come through. And that's going to create a lot of dissatisfaction with your colleagues, with your team members, with your employees. So if you can live your values first and foremost, that's key. I think the second thing we have to do is to double down on our communication. We live with our thoughts, we live with our values inside of our hearts and our heads every single day, but do we communicate that to everyone? They certainly see the actions we're taking, but actions without the words to back them up can tell a much different story. I'll never forget. I was stranded at O'Hare Airport. Who isn't at some point in their life?
Sure.
Thank you, American Airlines. It was a 4-hour delay before they completely shut things down. Now, when you're in that situation and you're not hearing from a company, when they're not communicating to you why there's a delay, your thoughts immediately turn to the negative. They're messing with us on purpose. All kinds of thoughts run away with you. When it turns out, well, maybe a pilot was sick, or maybe they had to divert because of a medical emergency, or who knows, right? But if they communicate with us on a regular basis and let us know what's going on, then we'd be less inclined to think negative thoughts about them. The same applies for your own business. Even if you're sick of saying the same thing over and over again, it's reassuring for your employees to hear from you, or for your client base to hear from you, because they don't live in your head with you. And if you can, like I said, understand what your values are, what your purpose is, and communicate that to people on a regular basis, to me, that takes care of about 95% of any of the issues that'll come up.
That is so, so good. And it seems like it is simple, and it's simple in theory, but not always simple in practice, although it should be. But again, to your point, it's something that we need to pay attention to, that we need to have awareness around and be intentional about it. So I thank you for sharing that. So I would love it if we could speak to storytelling. You are an excellent storyteller. I've watched some of your videos, listened to your podcasts, and you do such a great job of the emotional component, about taking the listener on a journey and making me as a listener feel like I'm part of that experience. Share with our audience why it is so valuable and important to learn the art of storytelling, and also some ways that we can actually learn to get better at it.
Well, thanks for that question, Jay. I think from the time we are infants, we are exposed to stories, nursery rhymes, and fairy tales. These are how we're introduced to the stories of the world. And a number of them are mythic in nature. I mean, think of Aesop's fables. What wonderful short stories those were to illustrate different vices and virtues of human nature. And you think about some of those dozens and dozens of fables that we know still to this day, they still apply, right? Human nature is constant. So we have enjoyed stories since before man could even speak, right? We were telling stories based on painting figures on the sides of caves, right? These were ways of conveying information to each other. And that's what stories really are. They're a way to convey knowledge or emotion, or a way to move people. And the best way to move people is with emotion. And, nobody sits at their child's bedtime, sits at their child's bedside, and the child says, "Daddy, can you read me a press release?" I mean, and yet that's how much information is being conveyed in today's world. But kids want to hear a story, and we all want to hear a story because it is buried deep within the human psyche. And fundamentally, what is a story? It's a hero's journey, right? It's somebody telling a tale about uh, running into a difficulty and overcoming that obstacle, and hopefully some kind of ending. Now, the ending isn't always happy, right? And here's the thing: when we hear a lot of companies try to tackle storytelling, who do they typically make the hero? Themselves. When in fact, when you think about what people want, they want to be acknowledged. They want to be part of something bigger than themselves. They want to be acknowledged as a human being. And to me, that's why our early success at Ford worked with social media, is because we were actually breaking out of that standard ones and zeros type acknowledgement of people. They were no longer just a number and a figure. They were actually a human being when we could talk to them across social media. And when you're telling a story and you make the customer the hero, right? And your product or business, well, maybe it's an enabling factor along the way, but it's the customer who's the hero. Well, of course, they're going to appreciate that kind of story because it's about them, right? And it's interesting. And I think we forget so much of that when we're trying to tell a story about how to make it interesting rather than how to just spew a bunch of facts and figures at people.
Absolutely. So true. And I would encourage everyone that is watching and listening right now to definitely check out Scott's podcast. Also, subscribe to his newsletter, because not only are they packed with worthwhile, incredible information that is relevant today, but obviously ties so much historical information intertwined into the lessons that are shared. So, Scott, as we begin to wrap up our conversation, I would love it if you would share with our audience where we can connect with you and consume your remarkable content.
Sure. You can certainly find me at scottmonty.com. I am also available on any podcast platform you happen to be running. Just search for Timeless Leadership. And of course, my newsletter comes out through Substack, which you can get to at timelesstimely.com or directly through my website as well.
Wonderful. Before I ask my final question to you, would you please give our audience a challenge?
So I think we're all very comfortable in the patterns we inhabit. The apps we open every day, the websites we visit, the publications we frequent. My challenge to you is to go out of your way to seek out some kind of information or platform or publication that isn't part of your usual media consumption habit. And it can be I would love it if it were a book, right? In a genre of literature that you typically don't spend time with. You know, like if you like detective fiction, for example, well, maybe take out a biography. Or if you read biographies an awful lot, well, try something in the nonfiction category, right? I think there's lots of different ways for us to explore. So my challenge is to go out of your way, get out of your own bubble, even if it's just for a moment. I'm not asking you to live outside of the bubble, but just explore the world outside you and see what kind of perspective that gives you.
An excellent challenge. I'm going to take you up on that one, and I am sure that our audience is going to do the same. So thank you for that. And here is my final question to you. What is the most difficult decision that you've had to make in the pursuit of who you've become?
I think it's probably an issue we all have to grapple with at one point or another. And that is deciding what not to do, what not to focus on. There are so many options available to all of us, whether it's career, the media we consume, the relationships we want to have. we're only human, and we only have the time and capacity to put our attention on so much. And to me, as a human being and as a leader, some of the most powerful things you can do are to say no to certain opportunities. And it comes at a cost, obviously, but the benefit should certainly outweigh the cost, because what you do focus on should have 100% of your passion and your mind.
That is so good. Well, thank you, Scott, so very much for joining us today on Business Minds Coffee Chat. I am thrilled about the opportunity to connect with you. Thank you for sharing of your wisdom, your voice, your storytelling. Thank you so much. I'm grateful for you, and I appreciate you.
Thank you, Jay. And may I say, you ask some of the most interesting questions of any podcast I've ever been on.
You are very kind. Thank you for that. And for all of you, thank you so very much for watching and listening. And would you please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and leave us a review? Scott and I would both love it if you would share a comment or two. What did you take away from this particular episode? And to enjoy more episodes, all you need to do is visit jscherbusinessconsulting.com, click the podcast button. And until next time, keep learning and growing. Make sure you do check out Scott Monty's podcast and his newsletter. And we'll see you on the next Business Minds Coffee Chat. Take care, everybody.
Jay Scherr,
Jay Scherr,
business consultant.
Jay Scherr.
Business Consulting.